about her level of blackness, which is to me a preposterous thing, but we can get into it for those who are curious. Also, the first South Asian woman to be tapped as part of the national ticket. Again, not the first woman of color or a black woman to actually run for president or vice president, but the first one to be tapped on the national party as part of the top of the ticket. So it's a big conversation starter happening out there in political spheres. And a lot of people are wondering whether or not the selection of Kamala Harris, the former attorney general for the state of California, a self-described top cop, is a tone-deaf selection in the face of all the progressive congressional wins and local elections being won by lefter-leaning Democrats. So we're going to have a full round of discussion all about that. And plus, we're going to discuss the impacts of COVID as schools around the country grand open and grand close all over again. And what does this mean also for higher education? Is your college going back to school? Are you going to sit in a classroom if your university or college decides to have in-person classes this semester? So a big, broad range of things we're going to get into today. Of course, we always love to hear from y'all in the comments. We already got some people percolating in the comments already talking about the squad isn't big enough. I'm not seeing enough coming out of the squad. We'll give them a chance. A couple of them haven't even been sworn in yet. But again, hit us up on the Twitter. What's up, everyone who's watching on Periscope? We appreciate you checking us out. And now to introduce our fantastic panel, we got a good one for you today on this Friday. They call him the angry sociologist. He is a sociologist. He's only sometimes angry. Taure Brown is joining us today from North Carolina. Joining us today from Detroit, Kenneth Williams. He is the communications director for the grassroots organization Detroit Action. And all the way from Cali, going back to Cali, Adriel Hampton is joining us, political consultant. And Adriel, I know this is an interesting time for you as well. I know you've got some firsthand perspective on Kamala Harris during her time in California. So we're going to get into all that in just a bit. Welcome, everybody. Thank y'all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome, hon. Where should we start first? Now, Taure, I was actually perusing your timeline and I saw you had posted this clip. Simmer down, it's not bad. I saw you posted this clip a while ago, like a few months ago, but it was from 2013. It's when Kamala Harris was still Attorney General prior to her being elected to the U.S. Senate. And she was speaking at a forum called Chicago Ideas. And she was talking about innovation and broader thinking, I guess, in the field of law enforcement. But this is what she had to say when it came to the idea of reform and possibly reallocating law enforcement and prison dollars into other places. Let's take a look at that.
We all have these posters in our closet that is attached to a stick that we sometimes will card out when we're talking about criminal justice policy and those statistics that you first heard when we opened it up, incarceration. And we run around with these signs, build more schools, less jails. Build more schools, less jails. And we walk around everywhere, build more schools. We protest, build more schools, less jails. Put money into education, not prisons. There's a fundamental problem with that approach, in my opinion. And it's this. I agree with that conceptually, but you have not addressed the reason I have 3 padlocks on my front door. So part of the discussion about reform of criminal justice policy has to be an acknowledgement that crime does occur, and especially when it is violent crime and serious crime, well, there should be a broad consensus that there should be serious and severe and swift consequence to crime.
Now, there was a viral tweet floating around social media that basically said, you know, this Biden-Harris ticket, it's the 94 crime bill, but it's the remix. Like, this is going to be Biden, his whole anti-crime, his Democratic version of law and order, but alongside top cop Kamala Harris. Taure, why was that clip significant to you? And what do you think it says about Kamala Harris's outlook on criminal justice? Now, granted, this was back in 2013, 7 years have passed. We are in a different time. Do you think that she still holds some of those similar values that she espoused, that, putting more money into schools as opposed to jails is not necessarily the solution to crime?
Oh, I still think she feels the same way. I mean, the thing about the clip that really got me, if you listen to her, she says, well, it doesn't account that crime occurs. Well, why does crime happen? Why do people break into your house? And the idea that she has 3 padlocks, I mean, she's just kind of playing into this fear-mongering narrative. I mean, she's a wealthy person that probably doesn't have to worry about crime so much in her neighborhoods, but poor and working class folks do. But the question is, why does crime happen? And she doesn't have any kind of consideration for that. For her, the idea that prisons and the police are the answer to crime, that they prevent crime. But we know that that's not the case. We know that prisons don't keep people safe. The police don't keep people safe. The answer for people who are committing crime is to get them help. We can't talk about crime divorced from all the other kind of inequalities and injustices that happen where these people are committing crimes at. And we also have to consider who has the ability to define what is or isn't a crime, because crime in itself is a social construct. It is a product of our society. So I think that Kamala Harris, I mean, while she may change her language now because she knows what's politically acceptable, her running mate has already said that he's not willing to defund the police. I mean, they've already made it quite clear that even though they can say words like systemic racism and criminal justice reform, when you look at what somebody has done, I mean, the evidence is quite clear. But again, just going back to her perspective, Kwame Ture used to say that any analysis you make of oppressed people where you don't include the oppressor, you'll come to an incorrect analysis. And that's what she has right there in that video clip. She has an incorrect analysis that crime just occurs. And the only solution to that is prisons and police, and not moving money to help people address their material inequalities and the injustice they faced every day.
Adriel, being the resident Californian of this panel, talk to us about your recollection as Kamala Harris held the top attorney general's position. And before that, she was even district attorney for the city of San Francisco, if I have that correct. How do Californians remember Kamala Harris in that role? I know she's currently senator, and you guys are actually going to get a new senator. Awesome, possibly. But what about her role and her time as AG?
Yeah, my perspective goes back to when she was running for district attorney. I was a reporter in San Francisco at the time, and I covered that campaign. And it was a very intense time in San Francisco because the incumbent DA, a gentleman named Terrence Hallinan, was aligned with progressive political factions in San Francisco, was considered a more progressive DA, although I think Kamala Harris was able to outflank him on some key issues. He was the son of someone who'd run for president under the Progressive Party. So it was like a pretty big fight between the progressives in San Francisco and the kind of machine Democrats. And San Francisco's political machine for Democrats is very, very strong. You've got Dianne Feinstein, you have Nancy Pelosi, and then now you have Kamala Harris, who I think it's important to remember that more than 20,000 people did show up for her kickoff rally in Oakland, but then she didn't do particularly well in the polling for president in California during the Democratic primary. But still, that machine politics are incredibly powerful, right? You can have someone who didn't perform particularly well as standing for president, then bumping to vice president. And if you think about 2017, it was pretty clear that a lot of Clinton donors were seeing Kamala Harris as the next shot for them in backing a star in the Democratic Party. I think you can't have great politicians under capitalism, just like you can't have ethical consumption under capitalism, because Kamala Harris is a very good politician in a system that is incredibly oppressive. I could see in the clip that you played that Taure mentioned, and I had seen that clip in the primary as well. And when she talks about having 3 locks on the door, she is really appealing to the fears of the audience. And it's an effective political trick if she thinks that her audience is probably wealthier folks who are scared of minorities, who see crime as a problem that they need more police to solve, and it's not fast enough to fund public schools. The audience, probably a lot of their kids are in private school. And so Kamala Harris is very much a product of the inequality in California. San Francisco has some of the worst inequality in the world, and has some of the highest concentration of billionaires in the world, and that's her political home. I do think there's an interesting contrast, and this has been evident in some of the discourse over the past few days, with Joe Biden is like a segregation era politician. He was raised in that environment, and anything that he did to fight segregation was as a white kid who didn't know what he was doing. He's kind of talked about that. His stories have been kind of all over the place about what role he played personally as a young person and as a teenager and as a young adult. But Kamala Harris was raised by parents who were more radical. You know, her dad's a Marxist. And she was raised in Berkeley during the kind of free speech movement. And she really did grow up seeing people at protests. So I think she cannot help be more socially liberal than a Joe Biden, which is a good thing. But she's very, very much a product of a campaign system that says you have to raise tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to successfully contest. And that's one of the reasons she's in the place she is now, because she definitely is ready to play ball with those forces in our society.
Absolutely. I mean, she definitely represents, to me, the stereotypical establishment Democrat, especially from a Black establishment Democrat perspective. Kenneth, I don't think people were shocked that Joe Biden selected Kamala Harris, but in this moment where we're seeing people in cities across the country remain in the streets, protesting against police violence, against police brutality, calling for police accountability, calling to defund the police, to abolish the police. And for the Democrats to make the selection of Kamala Harris, who is a friend of law. I mean, she is law enforcement. I mean, it's just beyond friendly. She is part of the law enforcement family, alongside Joe Biden, the architect of the 1994 crime bill, which sent thousands of Black and brown people to jail, effects that we're still dealing with some, decades later. Is this a fuck you to progressives, or is this the ticket that they believe, the only one that they could put together in order to defeat Donald Trump? Because it's kind of weird. Like, Trump describes himself as a law and order politician, but yet Kamala Harris probably is to the right of him. Even Joe Biden might be to the right of Trump when it comes to crime.
To be honest, Kim, I feel like it's actually on brand for Joe Biden to pick Kamala as his running mate. Like you said, Joe is the architect of the 94 crime bill, and Kamala, she's put a lot of people in jail for certain things, whether it's marijuana offenses or not, that didn't make a lot of sense. So I think it's on brand. I wouldn't say that it's like an FU to progressives everywhere, but I think it's on brand in a way that they truly believe that this is the best way to win this election. Because, I mean, we've seen the Democratic Party, we've seen the Democratic Party do this a number of times, where they don't really take into consideration minoritized communities, Black and brown communities, our struggles and our thoughts and our opinions. They do what they feel is the best, and they just expect us to show up when it's time to vote, but they don't really do a lot to listen to us and wonder why we're so angry, why we're so exhausted and things like that. So I truly believe that they think that this is the best way, which is that's a whole situation in itself.
I mean, can we talk about how, in order to be the first Black, the first woman, but especially the first Black woman, anything, or the first Black person to blank, there's so many Black and brown bodies that you really have to step over in order to get to that point. And I was thinking about Condoleezza Rice, when she was appointed National Security Advisor during, George W. Bush's administration, and then Colin Powell, who had a cabinet level position, and the first ever in that position, and then how he went to the United Nations and told so many lies in order to afford America's, I guess, legal foray into bombing the shit out of Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, why is it to be the first person to reach a certain stature, you have to really shit on Black and brown people in order to get there, Taure? I know you have opinions about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really the result of this, just neoliberal representation politics, where all you have to do is have a marginalized identity, identify as a Democrat, and people automatically assume that your politics are progressive or for the people or fighting against the system. And they also have the backing of the elite class of those marginalized people. I think in the late 60s and early 70s, a lot of Black radicals and scholars were really talking about these folks being a neo-colonial class, right? The prior to the 1960s, it was more of a colonial framework. But in the 1970s, where you have after this kind of social movement for Black representation and getting rid of Jim Crow segregation and all these things, you now have to have a managing class of folks to keep the Negroes in line or keep whoever the marginalized people in line. And there's folks who are willingly kind of serve that. So folks like Kamala Harris are not only just kind of presenting themselves as progressive, but are also having the backing of national media, Black media. You see Black celebrities came out in droves over the last 2 days to celebrate our sister. When she wins, we win. And it's often frameworked in what I call this thing, trickle down progress. The idea that one Black person in a high space will trickle down progress to the masses. And that's just not correct. I mean, there's been Black folks in charge of other Black folks since the slavery days. There was Black overseers, there was Black slave owners, there was Black slave drivers. Black slave patrol catchers, who we know now are the police. So there's always been this class of folks who have been willing to compromise and work with the ruling class in order to kind of benefit themselves at the expense of the masses. And that's the history of Kamala Harris, and that's specifically where she sits right now.
I want us to take a quick look at a clip from Vice. This was posted maybe about 10 months ago. But Vice interviewed a man named Jamal Truelove. Adriel, you're probably familiar with the story. He was falsely convicted of murder by Kamala Harris's office. His conviction was overturned. He was awarded over a $13 million settlement. But Vice sat down and spoke with him, and his perspective on the way he was treated by her office, being falsely accused and convicted of murder is pretty interesting. Let's take a look at that, Dwayne.
The District Attorney of San Francisco, Kamala Harris, appeared in the courtroom during your trial twice.
Yeah, the two times that Kamala Harris showed up to my trial was when I got convicted and also when they laid down the sentencing.
When you saw her on the day that the verdict was handed down, did you take that as a bad sign?
It felt to me that she was well aware about my case, and she was there to set her presence, almost take pride in getting a conviction. When I put in my appeal, the people that's fighting against my appeal to keep the conviction is the Attorney General office. I learned it reading, their reply to my appeal, and you see Kamala Harris' name at the bottom. And now it's starting to feel a little personal.
When you win the $13.1 million, it's a massive settlement. Did you feel like that was enough?
There's not an amount that could get back those 7 years. 6.5 years that I spent in prison. But instead of me coming home feeling like I was a victim, I wanted to prove that I'm a survivor, and I will not let my story go unheard. I'm not necessarily saying I'm looking for an apology, but some acknowledgement from her that she could have messed up will be, of course, that'll be huge. You could have made some mistakes. You could have missed some things. For me, it was a big miss. I had life in prison.
It was a big miss. 6.5 years in jail, falsely accused and convicted of murder. Jamal Truelove right there, courtesy of Vice Media. Adriel, I'm sure you remember that story as well. And, it's really sad that we sort of accept that there are a certain number of people who get falsely convicted and incarcerated behind crimes that they actually did not commit. I feel like law enforcement and the criminal justice system is resigned to that fact, and they don't necessarily go out of their way to correct bad prosecutions when they do happen. But thankfully, this young man was able to advocate for himself and get out of prison without Kamala Harris's help. When we look back on her record as a prosecutor, I mean, she has made some evolutions on some things. For example, she was not in favor initially of legalizing marijuana, but her position has since evolved on that. She was bragging to the Breakfast Club how she used to smoke weed. And it's like, well, you also used to lock people up for weed, Kamala. So, this shit ain't funny. And she also had a lot of criticism from progressives about allowing incarcerated people to go out and fight the wildfires. Bring us up to speed on some of the progressive criticisms of Kamala's record when she was there in California serving as Attorney General.
Yeah, I mean, the firefighter is an interesting one because they're using the prison labor to fight California's wildfires every summer. We have wildfire seasons, and these folks are paid something like $1 an hour or $2 if they're actively fighting a fire, and then they're not eligible to be firefighters if they have felonies. So there's a big disconnect between just using folks and their labor and their lives. And California is a very carceral state. So when she's making fun of people saying build more schools and less jails, California builds more prisons and less schools. That's how California does it. And it's how California did it with Governor Brown. And it's looking like that's what's going on with Governor Gavin Newsom. And then the AG just gets to fill those jails. I think I witnessed something very early in Kamala Harris's career that was eye-opening in what happens when a politician takes a different tact. And that was she campaigned for DA on not supporting the death penalty. And then shortly after, a cop was killed in San Francisco, and the cops really wanted the death penalty for the man accused of shooting this police officer. And Dianne Feinstein went to the cop's funeral and attacked Kamala Harris by, I don't think she used her name, but she may have, but it was a direct attack on Kamala Harris saying that she needed to pursue the death penalty, and Harris didn't. And that was I think that what's awful is those kind of actions where she's bucking the system started to really give way to upholding the carceral system in California. There's also a lot of controversy around her stance on transgender prisoners and not wanting the state to pay for medical care for transitioning transgender folks. And what we've seen, I think, in Kamala Harris's history is, even though now the national media will call her progressive, in San Francisco, despite some nods towards progressivism, particularly to get elected in her first term as DA, you see a Kamala Harris who ascended by moving to the right. And my one hope here, and I think some of Taure's comments are along these lines, is that if we're seeing the consolidation of neoliberal power, now we have a Biden-Harris ticket, does that open some space for the left? If you see the Democratic Party just really embracing, they're not going to defund the police, they're not going to respond to mass social movements. I don't know if this opens up room. I'm here in California where we have a top 2 system and where independents now register at higher rates than Republicans. So you have the potential for left movements to start to carve out space where California sends its folks national, where they look more progressive, because the U.S. is a very conservative country with very conservative politics. Can we see the left start to move forward in California, Washington, some of these Western states that are much more, Oregon, much more liberal? And, that's where I'm trying to find hope, because there's not a lot of hope in Kamala's record that she's going to respond to this national movement and that she's going to be able to pull Joe Biden to the left more than he's already had to do so in terms of like trying to apologize for his own record.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny, Kenny, to hear President Trump already starting his racist, misogynist attacks on Kamala Harris. And even though I may not agree with a lot of her politics or even any of her policies, I feel some kind of way when I see Trump, the blatant racist, using those tired tropes that are commonly trotted out against Black women. Angry, she was, nasty and all this nonsense. But to hear Trump call her a radical leftist, now that's funny, right? Like that brings out the giggles because it's like, sir, are we talking about the same person? How do you think? When it comes to how this campaign is eventually going to shake out, because Trump is going to try to paint Biden and Harris as so-called radical leftists, which everyone knows could be further from the truth. But how in the world are the Harris-Biden ticket going to defend themselves against such attacks? They're going to have to double down on the fact that they are not radicals at all. They're definitely centrist moderates, if not conservatives in their own right.
I think, Kim, honestly, they're going to have to acknowledge the cold, hard truth. And that cold, hard truth is that they were not, in their policies that they were championing or passing, particularly kind to Black and brown communities. They're going to have to acknowledge that, I fucked up. We fucked up in the past. They're going to have to acknowledge that and be truthful about it and stand on that and hopefully try to amend those things, all the things that they've broken, because it's been so many.
Jamal, where did I get Jamal? Because I was looking at Jamal Bowman's name on my thing. Sorry about that, Kenny. Talk to us about, Adriel was just discussing how California politicians are hopefully have this opportunity to continue to move leftward. But we just came off of a recent primary in Michigan where we saw Rashida Tlaib win secure what will be her second term in Congress, defeating, I believe was it the president of the Detroit City Council?
Yes. Yep. Brenda Jones.
An establishment Democrat, and a number of progressives in local races in and around the Detroit area came out victorious. Talk to us about what the political sentiment is in and around Metro Detroit.
Well, right now it's it's kind of a mixture of just being somber and optimistic. So somber because I'll use us as an example. At Detroit Action, we endorsed a lot of candidates. And one of those candidates was one of our former organizers, Rosalind Ogburn, who was going up for her position against Karen Whitsett, the politician who was sauntering around the White House praising Donald Trump for hydrochloroquine being an effective treatment to COVID-19. And she's just praising Trump and doing all of this craziness. But Rosalind wasn't victorious in that win. So people, we were really sad about that. But we were optimistic because Rashida came out on top. And that's a big win because Rashida, not even just with Detroit Action, Rashida is on the grounds in her community. Rashida is really in the trenches. She knows Detroiters and she is a Detroiter. So it's like a little bit of a mixture.
Interesting, because we had this conversation earlier in the week where I think it was Rashida Tlaib in an event, maybe 2018, 2019. She was on stage and booed Hillary Clinton, and all the establishment Democrats were just wishing nothing good was going to happen to Rashida until she did right by Hillary. And it turns out Rashida came away with the W. So congratulations to her. Congratulations to Ilhan Omar, again, winning her primary, heading to Congress for a second term. So congratulations to all the good progressives there. I wanted us to talk for a moment, if we could, gang, about the issue of representation and respectability. We kind of touched on it at the top of the hour. Taure had some comments and of course, Kenny had some things to say, but I want to post up what director Ava DuVernay put on her Instagram, basically finger wagging anybody. If you got anything bad to say about Kamala, don't say it around Ava, because Ava do not want to hear that shit. All she wants to hear is ski-wee all the way to the White House. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but basically she said that there is no debate. There is no room for it in my book. We either make this happen or literally more of us perish. People are dying. Someone I love died. This virus is real. If it hasn't visited your doorstep, it will. But Kamala did this, or she didn't do that. I hear you. I know, and I don't care, because what she didn't do is abandon citizens in a pandemic, rip babies from their mother's arms at the border, send federal troops to terrorize protesters, manufacture new ways to suppress Black and brown votes. Well, I think some people who have been examining Kamala Harris's record might actually disagree with some of those things. But it was really interesting to see Ava DuVernay, the director of the films. The film on Netflix is called 13th, where it dissects the 13th Amendment and talks about basically how slavery never ended. It just morphed into this criminal justice system that targets mainly Black and brown bodies. And the film that she did about the Exonerated Five, formerly the Central Park Five, When They See Us, detailing the story of how they were set up and framed and falsely convicted of this murder in Central Park in New York. And a lot of people took some exception to the fact that Ava DuVernay was not able to separate the work that she has done chronicling and documenting how the criminal justice system has fucked over Black people, and not putting together that same line that Kamala Harris, in her role as a prosecutor and self-proclaimed top cop, was also fucking over Black people. So, Taure, how is this cognitive dissonance coming about? It's revealing itself amongst members of the Black elite when it comes to the elevation of one of their own to a position that Black folks have never been in. We've never been vice president before. We should be happy, right?
I hate these people so much. I mean, I do, man. I do. I really do. And I get it, right? I do get it. Some parts of it is, I mean, there's this one thing, right, that if I look back on Obama, why do people love Obama? Why was Black folks so caught up in Obama? He's the first Black president. Well, what does that mean? Well, when you grow up in a society that says to be Black is to be less than, and you're told that you're, whether explicitly or implicitly, that you're not smart, not capable, that we don't have, the right tools to really be successful or be civilized, whatever that is, which really reinforces white supremacist narratives. But anyway, they serve as an example to say, look, this person is smart. This person is, went to Howard or went to wherever, Harvard or wherever the case may be, and did accomplish things, and they're Black and they're proud to be Black. So, we have to support this person because obviously they're on our side. But what you can see is really, it's this Black elite class who aren't catching as much hell as everybody else on the bottom. It's easy for them to kind of brush aside the policies that harm Black folks because, again, once you've reached a certain kind of level where you're not all the way immune for those kind of things, but they're not your everyday reality anymore, even if there ever was. And the Black elite class always they always have to play this game between trying to be for the masses, but also supporting the ruling class who ultimately gives them their power. They don't have any real economic base on their own. That's the whole analysis from E. Franklin Frazier in this book called Black Bourgeoisie that I encourage people to read if they're truly interested in it. But really what he talks about is folks having to serve two devils. You have to try to be like you're for the people, but also be on the side of the rulers. And that's a hypocritical stance. And you can see this thing exist constantly. Right now, this is clearly hypocrisy on Ava's behalf. How can you talk about mass incarceration and not have any smoke for a prosecutor? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, and it's pure hypocrisy. But again, she added that line in, I wish we would have talked about it, but it says, vote them in and then hold them accountable. Well, how are you going to do that? How are you going to hold folks accountable once they're in office? You going to bust up in the office and protest for them? Probably not. You'll probably say, how dare you, come at our first sister or something like that. If you can't hold politicians accountable during an election, you never are. Kamala Harris is not accountable to the masses of Black folks outside of the vote she needs from us. Outside of that, she's accountable to the billionaires and the millionaires who contribute money to her campaigns. And that's who they're going to answer to once they're in office. If Blue Cross and Blue Shield and everybody else is giving her and Joe Biden X amount of dollars, do you think that they're going to institute a healthcare system that gets rid of private health insurance? Hell no. right? And that's why Joe Biden gets on TV and lies and says that people like their private health insurance, even in the midst of a global pandemic. So, again, I just want people to not try to basically what I'm saying is I don't want people to rest on this inferiority complex and use Kamala Harris as somebody to, soothe your wounds. Really, the way that we get freedom is tearing down and building up and controlling shit on our own. And that's just the facts about it. But Kamala Harris, Ava DuVernay, and the rest of the Black elite class will willingly sell out poor and working class folks whenever they need to on behalf of their rulers. And that's what Ava DuVernay did right there.
Kenneth, I want to hear from you on this. People often mistake criticizing for hating or for wanting to tear a sister down. Why you want to tear a sister down? And that's not about tearing her down. It's about putting into context, into perspective, the way that her policies have impacted our community, even if it was, the community in San Francisco, in Oakland, and all of California. That's us as well, even if it's not us out there, you know what I mean? But at the same time, people misconstrue things that like what Taure said as a way of we're just jealous or somehow just upset that we're not going to be invited to the White House for all the cookouts, should the Biden-Harris ticket make it to the White House. What is your take on how the Black elites tend to marginalize other Black people in order to advance one of their own?
So my take on this particular situation is that you can feel however you feel in a way where you can be excited that, this Black woman is, she has a potential to be the vice president. But on the other hand, you have to acknowledge all the harm that she's done to our community. And whichever side you're on, you have to acknowledge either or. So when Ava made this statement, I almost felt like that she was shaming people for holding Kamala accountable, which is really shaming people for not being the Black elite, for not having the proximity to whiteness, which is a wealth that she's accumulated, through her art or her content. So I almost felt like she was being mad at people for having an opinion, being mad at us for being mad. And that's not the way. I don't think that's the way to go about it. And then the whole comment about, get them in and then hold them accountable. Accountability, that's not something you can pause or hold off on, especially when you are a Black or brown person. We just don't have that luxury, especially if we're a working class Black or brown person. Ava might have the time and the patience and, the resources to hold off on her accountability because she is wealthy. She's the literal Black elite. But we don't. Everybody else on the ground, we don't have that luxury. And then, it's interesting, wealthy Black people, it's interesting when I see them, make statements on how those of us who don't fall into that, I guess, echelon of wealth, how we should act and things like that. That's interesting, but they don't understand what we're going through. And they don't try to understand what the working class Black or brown people are going through. So that was it rubbed me the wrong way. I didn't really like the comment.
Speaking of comments, we got a comment from the comments. Sydney V says, it's not complicated at all. I'm in California. The only upside to a Kamala Harris vice presidency is that she won't be my corrupt senator anymore. Adriel, there has been some observations made about Kamala Harris having a very cozy relationship with Silicon Valley, intersect this with her history and law enforcement. It may not be quite the mix for people's civil rights and privacy rights, especially when it comes to cyber privacy. But to piggyback off that, I actually wanted to go to the clip of her and Joe Biden's first appearance as the almost official ticket for the Democrats. They were in Joe Biden's hometown of Wilmington, Delaware, at the Hotel DuPont of all places. But this is what Kamala Harris had to say as part of her opening remarks. They were only there for 6 or 7 minutes. They only said 2 things and then they left. But this is what she had to say.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500.
It's cool.
That's a good clip, too.
That was a good clip, too, Dwayne. Fuck it. Run it back. We go with that. That was Tulsi Gabbard.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Facts. More facts. Adriel, that was a good clip from Tulsi Gabbard. Just ticking off all the boxes of Kamala Harris's record. Your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the commenter that for those of us who live in California, it's a good thing. The problem is that it's more, I think people think that we're going to get to elect a senator, and that's extremely unlikely because the governor doesn't have to call a special election. He can simply appoint one. And since our governor is very much part of the same machine as Kamala Harris, in fact, the biggest thing was, would Gavin Newsom or Kamala Harris ascend first? And in this case, we see Kamala Harris going to the federal level. And now we're probably going to see someone whose politics are perhaps even worse become the senator from California. And then we have another senator who's probably will resign before her term is over. And then Gavin Newsom could get another appointment. So there's not a lot of hope for federal representation for California. And I honestly, the bright lining for me is that the Biden-Harris ticket and the likelihood that what the Democrats are trying to do is have Kamala Harris in there until 2032 will really start to marginalize the Republican Party nationally, because the big donors are going to see, hey, we can have a conservative regime like the Bush regime without all the craziness of the Tea Party and of Trumpism, which has been very destabilizing even for the elites. And that's why if you're an elite, you're mad because Donald Trump actually threatens the stability of the society itself, not just the safety and liberty of the poor. I agree that Kamala Harris is not going to be great for civil liberties, because what she's going to do is continue the kinds of policies that we saw from Bush and Obama, and without maybe some of the just outright craziness of Trump that has driven people to the streets. And so if she's a stabilizing neoliberal force, is that worse than when you have a destabilizer who people then rise up and try to get real change from their government? I think that is a real risk. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so here's the thing. So the Biden-Harris ticket made their debut as a couple. You know, they went official. They were Instagram official, I guess, as the kids say, yesterday in Wilmington, Delaware, where Joe Biden is from. And I actually thought that this was really smart. Clearly, they have to go on the attack of Donald Trump. And there's so many things to clap at Trump about. But obviously, we're in the middle of a fucking pandemic and people are dying by the tens of thousands. So this is what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's message was to their supporters on the first day as officially Biden-Harris 2020. Let's take a look at that, Dwayne.
That's what real leadership looks like. And when Joe talks about his priorities, he knows and he cares about the fact that we have, as a nation, witnessed 165,000 people who just in the last few months have died in our country. We know that those individuals represent families, loved ones, grandparents, parents, sisters and brothers, aunts and uncles of people who are mourning their loss every day. So what real leadership looks like is Joe Biden to speak up, sometimes telling us the stuff that we don't necessarily want to hear, but we need to know. And the need for this mandatory mask wearing will also be about what Joe has articulated and what a Biden-Harris administration will do in terms of creating a pandemic testing board to get tens of millions of testing kits where needed, to build a public health jobs corps, hiring at least 100,000 Americans to lead us through contact tracing as soon as we take office, and to chart a clear path forward for a safe and effective vaccine and guarantee every American, equal access to it by investing $25 billion, which is Joe's plan, $25 billion in manufacturing and distribution. And when Joe talks about this, I think it's important that the American people looking at the election coming up ask the current occupant of the White House, when am I going to get vaccinated? When am I actually going to get vaccinated? Because there may be some grand gestures offered by the current president about a vaccine, but it really doesn't matter until you can answer the question, when am I going to get vaccinated? So again, Joe Biden is about real leadership in our country, and I'm honored to be with you, Joe. Thank you.
I mean, the levels of enthusiasm coming from the podium. But I was with her up until she started talking about a vaccination, which I thought was a bit of a strange thing to hit Trump on, because, I mean, quite frankly, even if there was a Democrat in the White House right now, there still wouldn't be a vaccination. And we still wouldn't know when a vaccination would be widely available for mass distribution, right? So I thought that was a bit strange. But to hit Trump on the pandemic is the no-brainer thing to do, especially when you're opening your campaign. And when we talk about how COVID is impacting us nationwide, we're seeing the attempted reopening of some schools. Some universities are still in flux about what their plans are, but we're seeing 97,000 children. That number has probably gone up since this report initially was released. But we're also seeing, oh my God, 97,000 kids test positive for coronavirus in 2 weeks. That is astounding. And the fact that Trump and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos are saying this nonsense about how children aren't fatally impacted by COVID. Well, we know that's not true. We know that kids are being affected by a specific type of inflammatory disease post-COVID that is similar to Kawasaki's disease, and it is killing kids. And not only that, children can be asymptomatic carriers. Teachers in the classrooms are concerned about whether or not they will contract the virus from students who are not showing symptoms. In fact, that whole kerfuffle with that high school in North Paulding, Georgia, where the student took the picture on the first day of school of crowded hallways, no social distancing, no masks. Come to find out, students did test positive for COVID in that school. The school had to be closed. The girl who took the photo was suspended from school for broadcasting what was happening to her and her classmates. So guys, I want us to start with Biden-Harris, Trump, COVID. Adriel, I'm going to start with you being the political consultant. Your thoughts about the first thing that the Biden-Harris ticket did was hit Trump on the pandemic. Smart move?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think so. They have a good. That's the one thing that the neoliberal politicians, they do know how to run a state. It might not be a state where you have a ton of freedom. You saw. I remember the first press conference with Dr. Fauci, and I had no idea who he was. No one did at this first Trump press conference about COVID. And he talked about working with Silicon Valley companies on surveillance. And so what they wanted to do was, work really closely with the government and with Silicon Valley and make sure that your phones could track where you were and who you were with so they could do contact tracing. And the problem is that the people in America don't really trust their government. And then the second problem was that Trump is too crazy to actually try to do medical surveillance, right? And so what we're going to see, I think, is that a Democratic administration under Biden-Harris would be much better at this, but whether it really respects people's liberties and whether it actually takes care of them. Because you think about other countries providing food for people who can't go out and get food because they're in quarantine. Our country is not doing that. We're having to rely on mutual aid and our neighbors and our community groups to do that. The federal government is absent. The federal government was here with troops to stop protesters, but not here with the National Guard to provide food and distribute that food. In California, they did use National Guard in the food banks, but not to bring food to seniors who can't leave their home because of their fears. So I think that the way Trump has botched this so badly, where we have 165,000 people dead, really opens the door for Biden and Harris. And it's the reason that the race is not neck and neck right now, because Trump has done everything he can to do favors for the wealthy and for the business community. You saw basically the looting of the treasury for businesses, and a lot different than what it was advertised as, which was small business relief. You saw big businesses, businesses that are publicly traded. You saw the lobbyists going to get their share of these COVID relief funds. So Trump, took care of his people, didn't take care of the American people, and that's really where the room is for the Democrats. You're right that the vaccine, right now the news is that the vaccine in Russia, they're announcing a vaccine and everyone's saying it's not really ready, and that it's a PR stunt. And I hope we don't see the same thing here. I think what we will see is that they will still have to slow roll the vaccine because our medical infrastructure in this country is poor. We don't have Medicare for all. They'll have to have a new system for allowing people who don't have the funds to pay for a vaccine to get it. But it is the right note to strike, and it's also an area where it's easy to draw a contrast between administrations, particularly between like the Obama administration and their handling of pandemic response and what Trump has done to us with COVID. The school situation is terribly frightening. And the post office right now, I think, is one of the biggest stories, because you have Trump's Postmaster General ramping down postal services while we know they need to go way, way up because people don't want to be in long lines to vote in the age of COVID.
No, without a doubt, I think Trump is showing his hand several times that he intends to steal/manipulate this election, and that's going to be something. I mean, he's telling us this in August. He was telling us really back in June that this was his intention. But Kenneth, I wanted to circle back to what the messaging was from Biden-Harris about masks. Seems like a simple, straightforward thing, but when there are significant portions of the country that flat out refuse to wear masks, will get violent if you ask them to put on a mask in public. I think there was a situation in Michigan, if I have this right, where a person was actually killed, beat to death when they were asking another person to put on a mask in a public space, and the situation went south. But what I found interesting is that Biden-Harris said that they would not mandate, or this is basically what they explicitly said, is that they would not issue a federal mandate for mask wearing should they win the White House. Instead, they are encouraging governors to insist upon mandatory mask wearing. If that's kind of punking out a little bit, in my opinion. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's confusing. I was just confused hearing that, to be quite honest. It's like, if you're going to say something, stand on it. If you don't agree, how do I phrase this? If you're going to say something, stand on it. So if you feel like that everybody should be wearing masks, do what you can and make it a federal mandate, but don't say everybody should be wearing masks and then leave it up to the governors to decide on if their individual states should be wearing masks. No, go hard or go home, go all the way. It was just very confusing.
Taure, I know you work at a university and you're a graduate student there. What are North Carolina's plans right now as it relates to the colleges and universities reopening and what the plans are? And is that at all in conflict with what the governor is instituting in terms of either mask wearing or whatever phase of reopening North Carolina finds itself in? How are you feeling at this point in time regarding masks, COVID, and school reopening?
Sorry, I'm muted. But, the biggest thing for me looking at I mean, North Carolina is just a shit show if you're talking about the university system. I mean, I'm thankful not to be on campus this semester. I secured a research position where I'm not teaching. Usually I'm teaching undergrad classes, but I'm not this semester. But I mean, we have Roy Cooper, who is, thinking that he might get reelected, but I think he knows now that he's not. But rather than just, getting real gangsta about it and, kind of going real hard, he did, finally do the mask mandate and remaining in what we would call phase 2 and all this kind of stuff. But it's just all over the place. It's all over the place. Even Roy Cooper, deferred to local governments to make certain kind of things. And you can see just the madness behind that. But I think even with the Biden and Kamala, when the speech, you're hearing it like, oh, I'm going to make sure that everybody has equal access to the vaccine. Does that mean everybody's going to be able to get it for free? Or does, like Adriel said, they have to set something up for other people to get paid for it? How long does that take? Does that mean the rich folks can get it first because they can afford to pay for it while the poor folks don't? What is that? And I thought it was interesting that, Kamala also didn't talk about, what other senators have talked about as far as the $2,000 a month being retroactive up into March and continue to be paid out, pay people to sit the fuck down. And she said she kind of supported that. But when they asked the Biden campaign, did he support it? He had no comment. You see, like, if you're really going to bucket Trump and you really want to feel like you're going to support people in this pandemic, well, what's the solution? People need to sit the fuck down. Pay them the money that they need to sit home, right? Let's get this shit done and then keep it moving now that once we get a vaccine that's viable and everything else. But no, what did they say? Oh, we're gonna public health jobs. So you want people to work during the pandemic? You want to get more folks out here working when we see the numbers of folks that are dying aren't just from folks, partying, it's from folks working. And why are they working? Because they have to, because they have bills, because the bill collector doesn't accept COVID as an excuse. And we're on the brink of a massive, massive housing crisis, massive. There was no comments about that kind of stuff. What's going to happen with folks when they're out on the streets in the middle of a global pandemic? Now, again, there've been a few local governments and even maybe some state governments that have done some minimal things to kind of address this potential crisis. But if you're talking about the Democrats being so different from Trump, so oppositional to Trump, well, where is it? Okay, you're not going to mandate masks. He's not going to mandate masks. You're going to say everybody has access to some kind of vaccine. Trump has said the same kind of thing, essentially. Who knows when it actually is going to come through. So I'm really trying to figure out this major difference that everybody keeps talking about. I don't see how the Democrats, other than maybe listening to science a little bit, taking science a little bit more seriously, I don't see how their approach is so much different than what's going on right now. And what it is just kind of letting poor and working class people out here to struggle and try to make it on our own. And it's not working.
Guys, we are at the bottom of the hour. But before we go, I want to do a little Q&A and kind of go around the horn real quick. Let's say the Democratic consultants come to you and say, we got $10,000 we're going to give you for one piece of advice for Biden-Harris to defeat Trump. Adriel Hampton, let's start with you. For $10,000, what piece of advice are you offering up the Biden-Harris ticket in order to clear their path to victory over Trump-Pence?
Well, I think it's really bad that they've left so much room on their left that Trump could literally come in with policies to their left. He's trying to do it. He's just so ham-handed. Like he said, oh, we're going to make pre-existing conditions, covered. And then everyone's like, that's already part of Obamacare. But they literally could do federal marijuana legalization would be a policy that would get them a tremendous amount of support and excitement for their campaign without having to give up any of their, except the pharmaceutical companies, right? Be populist. They could do the $2,000 a month. Either of those policies or both, I think, would create a sure landslide. And to not be radical right now in the face of Trump is, I think, foolish.
Kenneth, in the swing state of Michigan, what advice would you give Biden-Harris to win your state in 2020?
Well, first, I'm going to ask them for more than $10,000 because I just feel like they got more than that.
Give it up. Yes.
But what I would recommend to them is that they really, really, really need to acknowledge why working class Black and brown people in Michigan and period feel the way that we do about them, given that their political past. And I think they not only need to acknowledge that, but they need to work on mending that and righting their wrongs.
And Taure, you're also in a contested state, North Carolina, not guaranteed to go red. Although
it's going.
All right. Well, for shits and giggles, what would you tell Biden and Harris to do in order to not only win your state, but win the Black vote and hopefully win the White House?
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the things that Adriel mentioned. I mean, addressing the real inequality that's been expanded over this COVID, maybe the $2,000 a month. Student loan debt cancellation is a big one. I mean, I don't know. Single payer healthcare. I don't know. Getting money away from the military budget, specifically focusing on how much money goes into the military, the 700 and plus that Democrats and Republicans approved, even though the Democrats are opposing Trump, resisting Trump, but they approve his military budget. But again, all of these things assumes that, Joe Biden isn't in the hands of the warmongers, which we know he is. He's thoroughly an imperialist. We're in the hands of I say all this to say that Joe Biden's not going to do any of these things, but these are the things that he could do to definitely win. But I know that I'm not going to hold my breath on that.
And see, to all the establishment Democrats out there that said that we a bunch of haters and we don't want Biden to win because just y'all, vote. If you don't vote for Joe Biden, that's a vote for Trump. Listen, nobody wants fucking Trump. We hate Trump. We don't like Trump. Trump is a disaster. We accept that. We acknowledge that. But at the same time, if we're going by the current ticket, Biden-Harris, and going by their records, they have been harmful to Black and brown communities. They have given us no indication that they don't intend to keep that going if they win. So we are hoping for the best, but we are definitely going to stay grounded in reality. Because again, we've seen this movie a couple times before. Panel, I want to thank you guys so much for hanging out with me on a Friday. Taure Brown, Kenneth Williams, new to the panel from Detroit Action. Thank you so much. And Adriel Hampton, friend of the show. We appreciate you guys stopping by and hanging out with Stir Crazy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim.
And gang, we will see you guys on Tuesday. Please don't forget, the Rona is still very much out here jumping on people. So if you're going to be out and about, put on a mask, wear your hands, don't be nasty. Try to stay away from others if you are feeling sick. And if you know others are feeling sick, stay away from them. The coronavirus is not a game. It is deadly. It is killing people. I do not want it to kill you. So please do what you need to do to keep yourself as safe as possible. We will see you next week. Have a great weekend. See you later. Bye.